The four grammatical cases in German are the nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. Every case answers a set of questions through declensions. A declension is the modification of a word's form that indicates its function within a sentence. Grammatically, German articles, nouns, pronouns, and adjectives are modified, allowing the language to determine the case, number, and gender of a word. German has four cases that modify words in four different ways, so they are expressions that define how a word modifies its form when used in a different context. A word can be modified in four ways because it can be expressed differently in four ways, and in German, these modifications typically consist of adding and modifying endings to articles, nouns, pronouns, and adjectives, depending on the case. Every German case requires a lot of explanation, so in this video, I'll cover the general meaning of the cases. But in the next videos, I'll show the rules for the declensions of the cases. Essentially, I will explain the cases formally and linguistically, while showing additional definitions that every case has. The formal definitions can really help in understanding the cases because they have more connection to the origin of the language. Also, I'll provide additional definitions while giving questions and emphasizing the words themselves. Later, I'll give specific phrases with new grammar, but you don't have to focus on that. Simply focus on the modified words. Additionally, I'll show the translations of the phrases because it will make more sense when you visually see what each case is about. The four cases in German are the nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. The nominative identifies the subject of a sentence, and it's the dictionary form of words, having the same meaning as in English. The accusative shows the direct object of a sentence. The dative determines the indirect object of a sentence, and it shows that something is given or addressed to something else. The genitive shows possession between subjects. It's used to express belonging to something, often translating to of a or of the in English, and it indicates the relationship between something from something else. Now, I will not specify the declensions in every case because I will explain them in the next videos, considering that other concepts should be known, like pluralization. These are the formal definitions of the cases, and to give better explanations, I'll show their additional functions to give you a legitimate understanding of how they fully work. The four German cases can be redefined as the four types of expressions, because each expression generates a different meaning and context. German modifies words in four different ways, thereby accommodating the four expressions. This idea can be understood by grammatical questions, like what and who, which also get modified in the cases, giving a precise definition. Here is an extended explanation of what each case does. The nominative answers what and who. The accusative answers what and whom. The dative answers to what and to whom. The genitive answers of what, of whom, and whose. By analyzing these questions, you can see that some cases have the same question words, but do not confuse them, because each expression is different on its own. In English, the questions don't get modified, and even though it may look like the same question, every case has different meanings. In German, some questions will visually be identical, because they borrow the same words, but just because the case has the same word as in a different case, it doesn't mean that it's the same question. Again, every case answers a different question with a different meaning, so do not confuse them. These are the full definitions of what each case answers, in correlation to the formal definitions of the cases. To make sure you fully understand the nature of the cases, I will use DeepL Translate to show what they look like. DeepL is an accurate translator that produces nuanced and highly accurate translations, so expect them to be modified differently than they are in English. First, we have what and who in the nominative. Was, wer. Was, wer. This is where you'll see how the words really change in a different case. Second, we have what and whom in the accusative. Was, wenn. Was, wenn. The accusative shows the direct object, so it's the thing or person that is directly affected by the action. By answering what and whom, the thing or person receives the action. In this case, was stays was, but wenn is the accusative modification of wer. Wer means who in the nominative, but wenn is whom in the accusative. Third, we have to what and to whom in the dative. Was, wem. Was, wem. The dative shows the indirect object, so the thing or person receives the direct object. By answering to what and to whom, the thing or person receives the direct object. In this case, was visually stays was, but it no longer means what. It means to what because it's in the dative, indicating that something is addressed to something else. Also, wem is the dative modification of wer. Wer means who in the nominative, but wem means to whom in the dative because it's addressed to something. Fourth, we have of what, of whom, and whose in the genitive. Wovon, von wem, wessen. Wovon, von wem, wessen. The genitive shows possession in a close relationship, and therefore it answers of what, of whom, and whose. The genitive is the trickiest because both wovon and von wem reflect the preference of the language for using the preposition von that expresses relationships and possession, especially when translating of into German. Wovon is a contraction of wo, what in the genitive, and von, of or from. However, it's possible to use an informal translation by saying von was, literally meaning of what or from what. Still, it's better to say wovon because it formally means of what. On the side, von wem is a simple construction using von, of from, and wem. This is the full translation of what each case answers. Notice the huge difference between English and German. What and whom stay the same in English and only add prepositions before the words, like to and of. In German, however, the words get modified completely, especially wer, wenn, wem, and wovon. But some words are borrowed, like was and wem. Even though some words are repeated, each case generates a different meaning. Sometimes you'll see the same words in different cases because German syntactically borrows them. This is the difference between English and German grammar. What and whom stay what and whom in English, but in German, half are modified while some are borrowed. All of these words mean what and whom, but they're expressed in different ways. These are German declensions, and they apply not only to questions, but to articles, nouns, pronouns, and adjectives too. This is the most complex topic in German, but it's possible to understand it with practice and theory. Finally, I will show some sentences in the cases to show how each case modifies words, depending on gender. The German cases can modify masculine words in one way that would be different than feminine and neuter words. With pluralization, this amount is now doubled, but again, do not worry about memorizing them. I'll explain all of them individually in the next videos. In the phrases, only focus on the words themselves. Don't try to understand which endings match which cases, because it's almost impossible to remember them. I'll show the phrases so you can see how German modifies words. Again, don't focus on new grammar and words that you don't know. Simply focus on the modified words. Let's take a singular masculine word like Hund, which is dog. I will exploit it in every case. Here we have a nominative expression. The big dog. Der große Hund. This expression is nominative because by asking who, we have an answer. Who is big? The dog is big, so it's nominative, because it's the only subject in the sentence without modification. Also, the adjective große is modified to fit the masculine noun Hund in the nominative. Here, we have an accusative sentence. I see the big dog. Ich sehe den großen Hund. By asking, I see whom, I have an answer. I see the big dog. So it's accusative, because Hund is the direct object in the sentence. In this case, the masculine definite article der changes to den, while große changes to großen to accommodate the direct object Hund in the accusative. Here, we have a dative sentence. I give a bone to the big dog. Ich gebe einen Knochen dem großen Hund. By asking, I give a bone to whom, I have an answer. I give a bone to the big dog. So it's dative, because Hund is the indirect object. Einen Knochen is the accusative direct object, being addressed to the indirect object Hund. In this case, the masculine definite article der changes to dem in the dative, while großen is visually the same as in the accusative. Also, the indefinite article einen is modified to accommodate Knochen in the accusative. Sometimes you'll see the same borrowed words, but do not confuse them with the meanings, which are different, especially when plural and with other genders. Here we have a genitive sentence. That is the bone of the big dog. Das ist der Knochen des großen Hundes. By asking, that is the bone of whom, or whose bone is it, we have an answer. That is the bone of the big dog. So it's genitive because it shows possession. In this case, the masculine definite article der changes to des in the genitive. Großen stays the same, but the noun itself, Hund, gets modified to Hundes because the genitive not only changes articles and adjectives, but also nouns, something the previous cases don't do. Also, das ist der Knochen is nominative, because if we isolate it, it generates a sentence that only has a subject, therefore being nominative with der. By adding a possessive element, we make a genitive sentence. Das ist der Knochen des großen Hundes. Look at how the words get modified, because these changes accommodate their cases and meanings. Notice how in English, the big dog stays the big dog in every sentence, because English doesn't modify words. In German, the big dog changes in 4 ways, which are different in every case. This is what the German cases do. They modify words in different ways, because each way generates a different expression. Now let's see what happens if we use a masculine indefinite article like ein, which is a. This is what happens. While a big dog stays the same in English, it changes in German. Although it's a lot of information, I highly advise to not memorize it because in the next videos, I'll explain each case individually with context. Let's finish with a different word in the same phrases, like Katze, which is cat. As you can see, the modifications and endings for feminine definite and indefinite articles are different from Hund, because Katze is a feminine word. For instance, die is repeated twice in the nominative and accusative, but it changes to der in the dative and genitive. The indefinite article becomes eine in the nominative and accusative, but it changes to einer in the dative and genitive. Also, the adjective große is borrowed multiple times with definite and indefinite articles, but it changes to großen, which is borrowed too. Let's take a neuter word, like gold. The modifications for definite articles are different from Katze and Hund because gold is a neuter word. For instance, das is repeated twice in the nominative and accusative, but it changes to dem in the dative and des in the genitive, which is the same as with masculine nouns. Also, the adjective reine is borrowed twice, but it changes to reinen, which is borrowed too. To finish it off, let's see what happens when everything is plural. This is what happens. German borrows many of its articles when plural, like die, den, and der, while also pluralizing the nouns and modifying the adjectives. At this point, the cases become complicated, and it's easy to get confused, so I will stop here. In conclusion, the German cases modify articles, nouns, pronouns, and adjectives in 4 different ways, while borrowing and repeating many of its words. In the next videos, I'll explain every case individually.